Welcome to Owl Stories, the place where mysteries come alive. Before we dive in, take a moment to let us know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. We love seeing how far our stories travel, and it's always amazing to know who's joining us around the world. Now imagine living in a city where the sun never rises, where the rain never falls, and where the weight of the ocean presses in on every side. From the moment you open your eyes in the morning, nothing feels like the surface world above. The air is still, the streets are quiet, and the sky you see overhead isn't really a sky at all. This is Cremenos, the city the world was never supposed to know. Behind the glowing lights, the perfect weather, and the breathtaking beauty, there are secrets. Secrets so strange that even the people who live here wonder if the city was ever meant to be a paradise or something else entirely. Stay close, because the truth about Cremenos is unlike anything you've ever heard. The story begins centuries from now, in an age when the surface world was collapsing under its own weight. Rising seas, dangerous weather, cities that once stood tall along coastlines found themselves underwater, abandoned, or destroyed. It was during this chaotic century that world leaders began to dream of something new. What if humanity could build a home beneath the very waters that threatened to destroy them? The idea sounded impossible at first. But slowly, step by step, engineers, scientists, and visionaries from more than 30 nations came together with one goal in mind: to create a self-sustaining city at the bottom of the ocean. After decades of planning, the impossible became real. A dome of reinforced glass, thick enough to withstand the crushing pressure of the ocean floor, rose off the coast of Madagascar. Inside that dome, the foundations of a city were built. Not just any city, but a mosaic of the greatest cities on earth. Cremenos was its name, chosen from the Greek word meaning hidden, and hidden it was, a jewel of steel, glass, and light, surrounded on all sides by the endless sea. The city opened in the year 2300. By then, it had already been declared one of the greatest wonders of the modern world. Tourists flooded in, drawn by the promise of visiting New York, Tokyo, Paris, and Rome without ever leaving the ocean floor. Families relocated, eager for the safety of a controlled climate, a place where storms and floods would never touch them again. For nearly half a century, Cremenos was voted the most beautiful vacation destination in the world. But beauty has a price. Behind the glamour of the architecture and the carefully controlled lights, whispers began to spread. Some said the city was never meant to be just a tourist attraction. Others claimed its founders had hidden intentions that the public was never told about. And that suspicion only grew as the years went on, because even in a city this perfect, things have a way of breaking. Life inside Cremenos was unlike anything on Earth. When newcomers first arrived, they always felt the same strange mix of wonder and unease. The city seemed so familiar: towering skyscrapers, glowing neon lights, traffic buzzing along the wide avenues. Yet every detail carried an uncanny difference. Above your head, there were no drifting clouds, no stormy skies, no sun piercing through the horizon. Instead, a great dome stretched outward and upward, curving like the inside of a crystal. Beyond that dome was the ocean itself. Millions of tons of water pressing against the glass. To make the city feel more natural, artificial lights were built into the dome, programmed to mimic sunrise, noon, sunset, and night. Every morning, a golden glow would spread across the glass until the entire city was bathed in light. By evening, that glow softened into deep orange, then purple, before fading into the artificial stars of night. For visitors, it felt magical. For residents, it became routine. The weather, too, was designed by human hands. In one district modeled after Chicago, massive fans would spin on the roof of the dome, sending gusts of air through the streets so strong that shopkeepers would clutch their hats and children would laugh as they leaned into the wind. In second Stockholm, winter was brought to life with synthetic snow spread across sidewalks. Families bundled up in coats just to experience the crunch of frost beneath their boots. Couples skated hand in hand across a frozen pond that, just days before, had been nothing more than a sheet of polished ice manufactured by engineers. And in second Seoul, sprinklers built high into the dome would release bursts of water in the summertime, drenching anyone caught outside. Parents grabbed their kids and ran for cover, while teenagers shouted and danced in the artificial rain. To the people of Cremenos, this was life. Perfectly engineered, perfectly safe. Food was another story. Most of it still came from the world above. Cargo submarines docked daily, carrying everything from fresh fruit and vegetables to crates of meat and grain. But Cremenos had its own farms as well. On the edges of the dome, large underwater fields glowed with artificial light, producing crops that could support millions of people. Farmers worked side by side with machines, harvesting wheat, rice, and vegetables that somehow managed to thrive at the bottom of the sea. Still, despite the effort to make life normal, many residents whispered that things felt strange. The city was too controlled, too perfect. When every season is artificial, when the sun itself is programmed, when rain falls only at the flip of a switch, can you really call it natural life? Children born here often wondered what real skies looked like. They saw movies, they read books, they listened to stories from their parents and grandparents. But none of it could compare to standing beneath a true sunset, or smelling the fresh scent of grass after a thunderstorm. And then there was the silence. Outside the dome, the ocean stretched endlessly. At night, when the lights dimmed and families retreated to their homes, the city grew quiet. If you listened closely, you might hear the distant sound of whales passing through the black water, or the faint vibration of waves rolling above, unheard by anyone else. Some found that silence comforting. Others found it terrifying. Cremenos was paradise, a paradise built by human hands, sealed in glass, and protected from the chaos of the surface world. But paradise has its flaws, because even as millions thrived in this hidden city, doubts remained. Was it really safe? Could glass and steel hold back the weight of the ocean forever? And if life here was so perfect, why did it feel so much like a cage? Those were the questions residents rarely spoke aloud. But one man in particular had spent his entire life looking closer than anyone else. A man who knew the dome better than the people who built it. His name was John, and for 50 years, he had been the quiet guardian of Cremenos. John had lived his entire life inside Cremenos. To most people, the city was a wonder to be admired, a place to enjoy vacations or to raise families in perfect safety. But for John, the city was also his workplace, and no one, not even the city's planners or engineers, had seen as much of it as he had. John was a window cleaner. That might sound ordinary, almost unimportant, but in Cremenos it was one of the most essential jobs in existence. Because the entire city was wrapped in glass, glass that stretched upward, outward, and in every direction. Glass that separated 30 million people from the crushing weight of the sea. Every morning, John climbed into his small pickup truck filled with cleaning supplies. A retractable squeegee, buckets of soapy water, safety gear, and a flashlight for inspections. Then he set off across the city to clean another section of the dome. For 50 years, he had followed the same routine. cleaning, scrubbing, checking, inspecting. He had driven through every district, parked on every street, and walked along every beach inside the dome. From the Eiffel Tower replica to the narrow streets of Little Lisbon, from the skyscrapers of New York to the red, tiled rooftops of Madrid, John had seen it all. And he never grew tired of it. He knew which rooftop in tiny Tokyo offered the perfect view of shimmering schools of fish as they drifted by. He knew which small cafe in the Parisian district baked the softest croissants. He even knew which corner of the Melbourne neighborhood was best for watching the dolphins swim past the glass at dusk. In his own way, John had become the city's unofficial guide. But he wasn't writing books or giving tours. He was simply living, observing, and remembering. There was something about his work that connected him to Cremenos in a way no one else could understand. Most people walked the streets without ever thinking about the dome above their heads. John spent every day face to face with it. He ran his hands along its smooth surface. He tapped it with his knuckles. He knew the sound of solid, flawless glass. And he knew the sound of glass that might be failing. In 50 years, John had only found one crack. It was small, shallow, and never broke through, but the memory of it never left him. He often thought about how fragile everything was. One mistake, one flaw, one weak spot, and the entire city could be in danger. As the years passed, John aged along with the city. His knees ached when he climbed ladders, his back tensed after long hours of scrubbing, yet he kept going because to him, this was more than a job. It was a responsibility. He was protecting people, millions of people, who would never even know his name. And he wasn't bitter about that. If anything, it gave him a quiet pride. Now, after nearly 5 decades of work, John was only months away from retirement. He often imagined the future, lying on the sand in Little Lisbon with his eyes closed, taking long walks through Melbourne. Or maybe just once, leaving the dome altogether, seeing the real sun, breathing real air, watching waves crash against a real shore. But until that day came, John still had a duty to perform. The city trusted him, and soon, that trust would be passed on to someone else. Because for the first time in half a century, John was training a replacement. And that replacement was not at all what he expected. The morning John first met his replacement, the city was still asleep. Artificial sunlight had not yet flooded the dome, and the streets glowed only with the neon lights of bars and clubs. John sat in his truck, sipping the last of his bitter coffee, wondering what kind of person he would be meeting. He had imagined someone older, maybe a young man just out of school, eager to prove himself. Someone strong, reliable, ready to take on the responsibility of guarding the dome. But when the boy arrived, John realized just how wrong he had been. His name was Teo. He was 16 years old, with curly black hair, dark skin, and wide, cautious eyes that darted across the beach where they met. He was tall for his age, already taller than John, with broad shoulders that hinted he would grow into a strong man. But there was something about his posture, the way he kept his hands tucked into his pockets, that told John he was nervous. "You must be my assistant," John said, extending his hand. Teo hesitated, then slowly pulled his hand free to shake. His grip was firm, but his eyes didn't quite meet John's. That was when John realized, this boy wasn't from here. Teo explained in a soft voice that he had only just moved to Cremenos with his parents. They had come from Porto, a coastal city far above the water. His parents had found work in engineering, and they wanted their son to have a job during the day, so they could homeschool him in the evenings. John listened closely. The boy reminded him of himself when he was young, quiet, uncertain, a little shy. But curious, always curious. What do you think of Cremenos so far? John asked as they began their first walk along the dome. Teo shrugged. It's different, he admitted. The buildings are nice, the lights are beautiful, but he trailed off, his voice lowering as if someone might overhear. It doesn't feel right being under all that water. What if the glass breaks? What if something happens? John chuckled, shaking his head. He picked up a small stone from the sand and flicked it against the glass wall beside them. The pebble bounced harmlessly away without leaving a mark. 3 feet thick, John said confidently. Stronger than anything y'all find on the surface. Believe me, kid, we're safer here than they are up there. But even as he said it, John could see the doubt in Teo's eyes. And in truth, he didn't blame him. For people who had lived their entire lives under the dome, Cremenos felt natural. But for newcomers like Teo, the silence of the sea pressing against the walls, the endless darkness beyond the glass, and the knowledge of what lay outside could feel overwhelming. Over time, that fear faded for most. The city's beauty and order softened their nerves, but not everyone adjusted so easily. Some people never shook the feeling that they were living inside a bubble that could burst at any moment. Teo was one of those people. Still, John saw something in him, a determination hidden beneath the worry, a spark of curiosity that reminded him of his own first days on the job. And though the boy was quiet, his eyes never stopped moving, soaking in every detail of the dome, the glass, and the world outside. As they worked together, John began to wonder if maybe this boy was more than just a replacement. Maybe he was the one person who could truly understand what the job meant. Because cleaning glass wasn't just about soap and water. It was about responsibility. It was about trust. It was about being the invisible line between life and death for millions of people who never thought twice about the walls around them. And soon, Teo would learn that lesson in a way he could never forget. It began with a shadow. A shape so massive, it blotted out the artificial sunlight, sliding silently across the dome like a nightmare. That was the day they met the creature. At first, John thought it was just a trick of the light. The artificial sun had just reached its full brightness, casting golden rays across the dome, when a shadow stretched across the sand at their feet. It was massive, larger than any fish John had ever seen, and it moved with a slow, deliberate glide. Teo froze, his eyes widened as the shadow slid upward across the glass, blocking out the light. "What is that?" he whispered. John didn't answer. He lifted his head, squinting at the surface of the dome, and that was when he saw it. Pressed against the glass, stretching across dozens of feet, was a creature unlike anything the boy had ever seen. Its skin was mottled gray, slick with moisture, its body pulsing gently as if it were breathing with the sea itself. And attached to that body were arms, not 2, not 4, but 8. Each arm was as thick as John's leg, covered in circular suction pads that clung to the glass with terrifying force. The creature shifted slightly, its tentacles sliding across the dome, leaving behind a smear of slime that caught the light like oil. Teo staggered backward, his hands balling into fists. "Is that an octopus?" John nodded slowly. His mouth was dry, but he tried to hide it. He had seen octopuses before, small ones, playful ones that floated near the coral reef and darted away when humans swam too close. But nothing like this. This octopus was the size of a bus. Its body alone stretched longer than John's truck. Each tentacle coiled and uncoiled with a strength that made the glass groan. For a long moment, the creature simply stared. 2 enormous eyes, each the size of a human head, turned toward John and Teo. The pupils contracted, then widened, as if the octopus was studying them. Watching them, It was an expression so eerily human that both of them felt their stomachs twist. Teo's voice cracked. Is it dangerous? John didn't look away from the creature. If the glass holds, we're fine. And if it doesn't? John finally turned to the boy, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Then we run. The octopus shifted again, pressing its body harder against the dome. Bubbles spiraled upward as it released a slow breath of water. Then, with surprising speed, it pushed off the glass and drifted into the depths, disappearing into the dark. The two of them stood in silence, staring at the smear it had left behind. A trail of slime and residue stretched across the glass like a signature, proof that the encounter had been real. John exhaled slowly. Looks like we've got work to do. Teo blinked in disbelief. You mean we have to clean that? Of course, John replied, grabbing his bucket and squeegee. That's the job. The boy laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. But when John began preparing the cleaning gear, he realized the man was serious. They worked together on the inner side of the dome, scrubbing away the strange residue. But no matter how hard they worked, the streaks seemed to cling, as if the ocean itself didn't want to let go. Teo wiped his brow, his young arms already tired. What about the outside? It smeared the glass out there too. How are we supposed to reach that? John glanced at him, a mischievous spark in his eyes. For the first time all morning, he laughed. A deep, genuine laugh that echoed across the empty beach. Oh, you're in for a treat, John said. Because this is the part of the job no one ever tells you about. Teo frowned. What do you mean? John pointed toward the far edge of the district, where a glittering building of glass and steel rose near the dome. It looked almost like a palace, its walls shimmering with reflections of the artificial sun. That, John said, is how we get outside. Teo's eyes widened. Outside the dome, John nodded. You wanted to know what it feels like to be underwater. You're about to find out. The boy froze, unsure whether to feel excited or terrified. The shadow of the octopus still haunted him. Its giant eyes burned into his memory. The thought of swimming out there, into that endless ocean, sent a shiver down his spine. But there was no turning back now. For better or worse, Teo was about to discover what life outside the dome truly meant. The building John had pointed to was called the submarine house. From a distance, it shimmered like a jewel pressed against the edge of the dome. Its glass walls caught the artificial sunlight and scattered it into colors that rippled like waves. To visitors, it looked like a monument to progress, the grand gateway between the city below and the world above. But to John, it was something else entirely. It was the door to the ocean. He and Teo walked together through the crowded streets until they reached the great entrance. Families bustled past them, carrying luggage, their voices echoing in a dozen languages. Submarines came and went from docks just beyond the building, ferrying passengers across oceans in journeys that felt as ordinary as flights had once been. But John ignored the tourists, the noise, and the chaos. He led Teo past the ticket counters and food courts, past the long lines of travelers waiting to board. Finally, they reached a quieter section, at the far end of the building. A place most visitors never even noticed. This was the equipment wing. Behind heavy doors lay rows of lockers filled with scuba gear. Black wetsuits hung like shadows against the wall. Air tanks stood lined in perfect rows, waiting for the next set of divers. Masks and regulators gleamed under fluorescent lights, each piece carefully maintained by the city staff. Teo stared in silence, his eyes widening as John casually grabbed 2 sets of gear. You're serious, the boy muttered. We're really going out there, John smiled. You'll never forget it. They suited up slowly. John moved with practiced ease, strapping on his tank, adjusting the buckles of his suit, and fitting the mask over his face with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Teo, on the other hand, fumbled with every strap and clip, his fingers clumsy with nerves. John helped him tighten the air tank, checked the regulator, and patted his shoulder. Relax, the ocean isn't out to get you. Breathe slow, move steady, let the water carry you. Teo nodded, though his eyes betrayed his fear. Together, they stepped into the airlock. The heavy door clanged shut behind them, sealing them in a chamber no larger than a prison cell. The silence was overwhelming. Then, with the hiss of hydraulics, the outer door opened. Water rushed in. It poured around their ankles, rising past their knees, their waists, their chests, cold and heavy. Teo gasped, his breathing quickening through the mask, but John placed a calming hand on his arm and gave him a reassuring nod. When the water reached their chins, the final hatch swung open, and suddenly they were no longer standing in a chamber. They were floating, and beyond the door lay the endless ocean. For a moment, Teo forgot to breathe. The water was not black, as he had imagined. It was alive with color. Rays of sunlight pierced through the dome behind them, scattering into beams that lit the seafloor in streaks of gold. Schools of tiny silver fish darted in unison, shimmering like liquid metal. Corals spread across the seabed in every color of the rainbow: crimson, violet, emerald, and sapphire. And then there was the silence. The noise of the city had vanished. No engines, no chatter, no footsteps. Only the muffled sound of their own breathing and the gentle pulse of the ocean. It was a silence so complete that it felt like another world. Teo drifted uncertainly at first, his arms flailing as the current tugged him sideways. But John swam with steady strokes, his body weightless, his movements effortless. He motioned for Teo to follow. Together, they floated along the outer wall of the dome. From this side, the city looked unreal. Towers of glass and steel shimmered in the distance, their lights glowing faintly through the water. Central Park lay stretched like a green rectangle, its trees swaying under the filtered sunlight. The Eiffel Tower rose in the distance, its iron frame warped slightly by the refraction of the water. It was like staring at a dream, a city within a bubble, suspended in the heart of the ocean. Teo pressed his hand against the dome, his eyes wide with awe. Families strolled by on the other side, children pointing upward without realizing that just inches away, in the water, two divers floated like ghosts. John swam further, leading him toward the coral reef. The reef was alive with movement. Bright yellow fish with stripes of midnight blue. Small darting creatures that flashed silver as they turned. A turtle glided gracefully past, its flippers cutting the water in slow, steady strokes. Its eyes lingered on the two humans, calm and curious, before it drifted away into the deep. And then came the dolphins. A pair of them swept into view, their sleek bodies cutting through the water like arrows. They circled John and Teo playfully, one of them brushing its nose against John's leg, as though greeting an old friend. The boy's laughter burst into the regulator, bubbling upward toward the surface. For the first time since arriving in Cremenos, he felt free. The fear melted away, no walls, no ceilings, no artificial lights, just the endless living ocean. For John, it was a reminder of why he had loved this job for so long. Out here, away from the crowds, away from the noise, he could breathe. The ocean wrapped around him like a second skin, holding him weightless, timeless. He often thought that this must be what astronauts felt, floating in space with only their breath and heartbeat to remind them they were alive. They swam on, exploring the great wall of the dome. Here and there, algae clung stubbornly to the glass, and John stopped to scrape it away with his squeegee. Teo followed his example, pressing the tool against the smooth surface, scrubbing in slow circles until the glass gleamed. And yet, beyond the work, his eyes never stopped wandering. Every flicker of movement in the distance drew his gaze. Every shadow sent his heart racing, because somewhere out there, beyond the coral, beyond the schools of fish, beyond the reach of the artificial light, something else was waiting. The ocean was beautiful, the ocean was peaceful, but the ocean was never empty. The deeper they swam, the more the city below seemed to shift from something familiar into something unreal. From inside the dome, Cremenos looked like any other great metropolis. Streets, buildings, parks, crowds. But from the outside, from the silent vastness of the ocean, it was something else entirely. A glowing jewel, suspended in the deep. John motioned for Teo to follow him upward. They kicked slowly, carefully, letting the current carry them as they rose higher and higher above the city. Their bubbles trailed behind them in silver spirals. Schools of fish parted to make way, flashing their iridescent scales like sparks of light. It took minutes, but finally, they reached the very top of the dome. There, they pressed their palms against the smooth glass and looked down. And what they saw made Teo's breath catch in his throat. The city stretched out in perfect order, a sight that could never be understood from the streets below. At the center was a pond, perfectly circular, glowing faintly under the artificial lights. Roads branched outward from it like spokes of a wheel, dividing the city into pie-shaped slices. Each slice contained 4 districts, arranged with mathematical precision. 32 districts in total, arranged like a clock face carved into the ocean floor. From above, Cremenos didn't look like a city. It looked like a design, a pattern, a bullseye. John had seen this view many times before, but it never failed to stir something deep inside him. The symmetry, the precision, the way every building seemed positioned with purpose. He pointed toward the inner ring, where replicas of the world's great cities had been rebuilt with startling accuracy. There was London, with the slow rotation of the London Eye marking the skyline. There was Beijing, its sleek skyscrapers crowding together beside ancient-style temples painted red and green. There was Madrid, low and compact, with its courtyards and narrow streets, and Rome, where the Colosseum rose proudly, even here at the bottom of the sea. Teo's eyes darted from district to district, overwhelmed by the scale. His home in Porto had been beautiful, yes, but nothing like this. This was the entire world in miniature, a copy of everything humans had once built above, transplanted below. And yet, there was something unsettling about it. From this high vantage, the city looked less like a celebration of culture and more like a controlled experiment. Every district, every road, every landmark carefully placed, as if the city had been designed not for beauty, but for observation. "Why does it look like that?" Teo finally asked, his voice muffled through the regulator. John turned his head slowly. The boy's question echoed in his own mind. He had wondered the same thing countless times. Why this shape? Why this order? Why go to such extremes to arrange a city in perfect slices, when real cities above the water had always grown messy, uneven, and alive? "I don't know," John admitted, "but sometimes I think we weren't supposed to notice." They floated in silence, staring down at the glowing wheel of light beneath them. Cars moved like fireflies along the streets. Tiny figures hurried between buildings, unaware that 2 divers were watching from above. From here, the city seemed small, fragile, like a toy resting in the palm of some unseen hand. The longer they watched, the stranger it became. Teo pressed his hand against the glass, his eyes wide. "It looks like a target." John nodded slowly. "Yes, a target, The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Neither of them said more, but both understood that once you saw Cremenos from above, you could never look at it the same way again. The city was not just a home, it was a design, and designs always had a purpose. Somewhere deep in the back of his mind, John felt the old unease returning, the same unease he had pushed away for years. The same unease he had laughed off whenever others whispered about the truth behind Cremenos. And yet, staring down at that perfect bull's eye carved into the sea, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Not by the fish, not by the dolphins, not even by the octopus that had appeared against the glass earlier that day, but by something bigger, something unseen, something that had been there since the city's very beginning. John turned to Teo and gave him a small nod. It was time to move on. They couldn't stay here forever, staring at the city from above, or they might never leave. But even as they swam away, that image stayed burned in their minds. Cremenos, glowing in the deep. A city shaped like a target. A paradise with a purpose no one had ever explained. When John and Teo returned through the airlock, peeling off their heavy suits and placing their gear back in the racks, the boy's eyes were still wide with wonder. He had seen the reef, the fish, the dolphins, even the view of Cremenos from above. And yet, one thought clung to him, unshakable. "Why is the city shaped like that?" he finally asked. John didn't answer right away. He sat on the bench, drying his hair with a rough towel, staring at the wet floor. The boy's question echoed in his head like a bell. Why indeed? For years, John had heard whispers, not in newspapers or official speeches. Never from the city council or engineers, but in quiet corners of cafes, in hushed voices along narrow streets. Rumors that Cremenos wasn't simply a masterpiece of architecture. Rumors that it was something else. Some said the city had been built as a survival bunker, a safe haven in case the world above collapsed entirely. Not just a place to live, but the last refuge of humanity, hidden at the bottom of the ocean where no war, no storm, no catastrophe could touch it. Others believed the city was an experiment, a way for powerful nations to study how millions of people might live in isolation, cut off from the natural world, dependent on artificial systems for every need. To them, Cremenos was less of a city and more of a giant laboratory, and the residents were the test subjects. And then there were the darker theories, the ones people rarely said out loud. Some whispered that Cremenos wasn't designed by humans alone, that its perfect symmetry, its strange bull's-eye shape, its unshakable silence came from something beyond. A technology borrowed, copied, or stolen from a source no one dared to name. No one could prove any of it. No one had evidence, but the questions remained, always just beneath the surface. Why 32 districts? Why the exact symmetry? Why replicate cities from around the world, instead of building something new? And why here, off the coast of Madagascar, in waters so deep and so isolated? John had asked himself these questions countless times during his long career. But each time he buried them under his work. It was easier to focus on cleaning glass, inspecting for cracks, protecting people. Easier to ignore the unease than to confront it. But now, with Teo by his side, the questions felt heavier. The boy's fresh eyes saw the things John had learned to dismiss, and seeing that spark of doubt reflected in someone else made it harder to ignore. As they walked back into the city, Teo continued pressing. "Why do they keep expanding?" he asked. "My mom said they're building a new district, but no one knows what it's going to be. Why don't they just tell us? Why is it always a secret?" John sighed. He had read the same speculation in the morning papers. Some believed the new district would be a South American city, maybe Sao Paulo or Bogota. Others said it would be Mexico City, or Taipei, or something else entirely. But the truth was, no one knew. The council always kept expansion plans hidden until the very last moment. New districts would rise without warning, announced only when construction was already nearly complete. And each time, the official explanation was the same: to honor the diversity of the world, to create a global city under the sea. But John wasn't sure he believed that anymore. He thought of the view from above, the perfect wheel, the perfect symmetry. He thought of how each district fit into place like pieces of a puzzle that wasn't finished yet. What picture would it form when it was complete? That was the unanswered question. And as much as John wanted to protect the boy from fear, he couldn't shake the feeling that someday those answers would come. And when they did, Cremenos would never be the same. Cremenos was built as a miracle. A city beneath the waves, glowing with artificial sunlight, filled with replicas of the greatest wonders of the surface. To the outside world, it was proof that humanity could conquer even the ocean. But from the inside, things looked different. The silence was too perfect, the symmetry too precise, and the unanswered questions only grew louder. Why was the city designed like a target? Why did new districts appear without warning? And who or what was truly behind the glass, watching from the dark? For John, those questions lingered like shadows. For Teo, they were just beginning. And together, they were about to stumble into a truth far stranger than either of them could imagine. Because as much as the people of Cremenos wanted to believe their city was safe, something else was stirring in the depths. Something the council had never spoken about. Something that would change everything. And this is where the next story begins. Night in Cremenos was unlike night anywhere else in the world. When the artificial sun dipped low and the dome shifted from warm gold to deep violet, the streets did not fade into silence. They transformed. Neon lights flickered on, painting the avenues with glowing blues, reds, and greens. Reflections shimmered in the glass walls of skyscrapers, and music drifted out from clubs and restaurants, where people gathered long after the false sunset. From inside, it looked like a city alive with endless energy. But for John and Teo, walking along the quieter districts, it felt different. The night had a weight to it. Without real stars, without a real moon, the darkness felt like a hollow shell wrapped around the dome. Outside the glass, the ocean pressed closer, black and unknowable. Teo tilted his head upward, staring at the faint outline of fish gliding across the glass above. "It's strange," he whispered. "Even when it looks alive, it feels like the city is pretending, like it's putting on a mask for us." John had felt the same way many times before. The city's nightlife was loud, bright, and carefully controlled. But beneath it was a silence that no music could cover. The silence of water pressing against walls. The silence of a world cut off from the sky. They wandered through the Chicago district, where artificial wind blew down the streets, scattering bits of paper and dust, as if an invisible storm had just passed. Farther ahead, the Parisian quarter glowed with the buttery scent of fresh bread drifting from late-night café. Tourists laughed over glasses of wine, while couples strolled arm in arm along cobblestone paths. It looked beautiful. Too beautiful. Teo slowed his pace as they approached the edge of the district. His eyes scanned the horizon where the buildings thinned and the lights dimmed. Beyond the last row of glowing windows, shadows stretched into place, as most people never visited. "What's over there?" he asked. John hesitated. He had spent decades circling the city, cleaning glass in every neighborhood. He knew the bustling districts where life was loud and colorful. But he also knew the forgotten edges, the quiet corners where construction paused, where new districts waited half finished in the shadows. Not many people go there, John said quietly. It's where the city grows, where they build the new districts before anyone even knows what they'll be. Teo's eyes narrowed, and no one asks why. Some do, John admitted. But the council gives the same answer every time. Expansion, growth, diversity. The official words never change. The boy shook his head. But cities above ground don't grow in secret. They don't hide their plans. John glanced at him. The boy was sharper than most, curious in a way that could be dangerous. And yet, John felt that same pull too. The itch of questions that had lived in the back of his mind for years. The streets around them grew quieter as they walked farther. Fewer lights, fewer voices. The polished perfection of Cremenos seemed to fade, leaving behind bare steel beams and scaffolding lit only by the faint glow of emergency lamps. At the very edge of the city, the dome loomed above them, curving high and dark. Beyond, it was nothing but ocean. Teo pressed his hand against the glass. It was cold. "It feels different here," he murmured. "Like the city doesn't want us to see this part." John didn't answer. He only looked out into the black water pressing against the dome. He had spent his whole life protecting this city, but in the quiet corners like this, even he felt the unease. The city of Cremenos never truly slept, but some places were meant to stay hidden in the dark, and soon, John and Teo were about to learn why. The deeper they walked into the outskirts of Cremenos, the stranger the city became. Here, the neatly arranged streets gave way to scaffolding and half-finished towers. Cranes hung motionless in the shadows, their long arms frozen like the skeletons of giant beasts. Sheets of metal clanged softly in the artificial wind, and the smell of fresh concrete still lingered in the air. Unlike the bustling inner districts, there were no cafes here, no glowing shop windows, no music drifting from open doors. Instead, there was silence, broken only by the hum of distant machinery echoing through the dome. Teo's footsteps slowed as they passed a row of unfinished buildings. The walls stood bare, the windows nothing but hollow frames staring into the void. "Doesn't anyone ever come here?" he asked. "Workers," John replied. His voice was low, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "They come in shifts. Engineers, builders. But when the work is done for the day, the place empties. It's as though these districts don't exist until the council decides to show them to the public." Teo frowned. Why keep them hidden? John didn't answer right away. He had wondered the same thing for years, but he had never spoken the question aloud. The official announcements always came late, long after construction was already well underway. By then, the people had no choice but to accept whatever new district had appeared. Ahead, the street narrowed into an alley lined with stacks of unused materials. The dim lights flickered above them, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. A sound echoed faintly in the distance, a low, metallic clang, followed by the steady rhythm of something mechanical. Teo stopped. "Do you hear that?" John nodded. He had heard noises like this before while cleaning the dome at night. Vibrations that rattled through the glass, sounds that had no clear source. But here, standing at the edge of a half-built district, the sound felt closer, more deliberate. They followed the noise until the alley opened onto a wide platform at the very edge of the dome. Before them stretched a massive structure, still under construction. Steel beams rose upward like ribs, forming the skeleton of a building so large it seemed to press against the sky of the dome itself. But it wasn't just the size that unsettled them, it was the design. The shape curved in ways John had never seen in any surface city. It wasn't a copy of Paris, or New York, or Rome. It was something else entirely, something unfamiliar. Teo's voice was barely a whisper. "This doesn't look like any district I've seen before." "No," John admitted. "It doesn't." The mechanical sound grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. Somewhere within the unfinished structure, something was moving. Not workers, not tools, something heavier, something hidden. They stepped closer, careful not to draw attention. But as they reached the edge of the platform, Teo froze. Pressed against the glass of the dome, just beyond the construction site, was a mark. At first, John thought it was a crack, but as the dim light caught it, he saw it was something else. A long, jagged scrape, carved into the glass as though by something sharp. Teo's breath caught in his throat. "That's not from a machine." John felt his chest tighten. The scrape was too deliberate, too precise. And it was fresh. He glanced at the boy, then back at the mark on the glass. Whatever had left it was out there in the dark. And it had come closer than anything should have been able to. For the first time in years, John felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Fear. The scrape on the glass was only the beginning. John and Teo stood in silence, their eyes fixed on the jagged mark that stretched across the dome. It was longer than John's arm, rough at the edges, as if something powerful had dragged itself across the surface with incredible force. The boy reached out and touched the glass gently, his palm pressing against the cold surface. If this cracked the whole city, would John placed a hand on his shoulder before he could finish. "That's why we don't let it crack," he said firmly, though his own words felt thin against the weight of what they were seeing. For decades, John had walked these edges, scrubbing algae and inspecting for flaws. He had seen scratches before, but nothing like this. This wasn't the faint wear of time, or the marks left by clumsy equipment. This was something intentional. Something alive. They followed the curve of the dome, moving carefully along the platform. Each step echoed against the steel. The sound carried unnaturally far in the empty district. The further they walked, the darker it became. Few lamps lit this part of the city, as though the council wanted to keep it hidden from sight. And then they saw more, another mark, then another. Long streaks carved into the glass, parallel lines running across the surface, as if a creature had pressed several claws at once. Teo's voice trembled. "It's like something's trying to get in." John's jaw tightened. He wanted to tell the boy it wasn't possible. That the dome was strong enough to withstand anything the ocean could throw at it. That the city had been built to last forever. But the words stuck in his throat. Because in the back of his mind, he remembered the octopus. The massive creature that had pressed itself against the dome days earlier, watching them with human-like eyes. If such things existed, what else could be out there in the dark? The ground beneath their feet vibrated suddenly, a low hum that pulsed through the steel platform and up their legs. Teo grabbed the railing instinctively, his eyes wide. What was that? John frowned. He had felt vibrations before, but always faint, distant, like background noise from the ocean currents. This was different. This was focused, intentional. The sound came again, deeper this time, resonating through the dome like a heartbeat. And then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It pressed against them, heavy and suffocating, as though the ocean itself was holding its breath. John scanned the shadows beyond the glass, but the water was too dark to see more than a few feet. A flicker of movement caught his eye, but when he turned, it was gone. Teo whispered, "Something's out there." John nodded slowly, "And it knows we're here." The boy shivered. For the first time, the dome didn't feel like protection. It felt like thin glass between them and something vast, something watching, something waiting. They turned back toward the city, walking quickly now. But the unease followed them with every step. The marks on the dome were burned into their memory, proof that the ocean beyond was not empty. And worse, proof that the council's silence was hiding more than anyone dared to imagine. Because if John and Teo had found this so easily, how long had the council known? And why had they chosen to keep it secret? The next day, John tried to carry on as if nothing had happened. He told himself that the scratches on the dome were just marks from equipment, that the vibrations had been the hum of distant machinery. But the unease clung to him like a shadow. Teo noticed. The boy was quieter than usual, his eyes always drifting toward the edges of the city, toward the dark beyond the glass. He wasn't afraid exactly, but curious, too curious. That curiosity led them to the artificial beaches. Cremenos had several, each designed to mimic the coastlines of the surface world. Fine white sand was shipped in from above, spread carefully across the shoreline, raked and cleaned every morning to maintain its perfect shine. Families visited during the day, building castles and wading in the shallow artificial tide. At night, the beaches emptied, leaving behind only the soft hiss of waves generated by hidden pumps. It was supposed to be peaceful, but John knew these beaches were more than they appeared. Teo dug his foot into the sand absent-mindedly as they walked. His heels struck something hard beneath the surface. He crouched down, brushed the sand away, and uncovered a small section of metal grating. "John," he said, "what's this?" John's heart skipped. He knelt beside the boy, brushing more sand aside until the grate revealed itself fully. Beneath it, faint light glowed, and the sound of machinery rumbled steadily. He had seen these before. Maintenance vents, but they weren't supposed to be this close to the surface. They pried the grate open just enough to peer inside. Below the sand stretched a tunnel, lined with pipes and wires, pulsing with energy. The air was warm, humming with power. Somewhere deep inside, something was moving, a low whirring that echoed through the vents like the steady rhythm of breath. Teo's eyes widened. "What is all this?" John shook his head slowly. "I don't know, but it doesn't look like standard maintenance." The boy leaned closer, listening. "It sounds alive." The words sent a chill through John. He wanted to dismiss them, to laugh and wave it off. But he couldn't. The sound was too strange, too deliberate. It didn't feel like ordinary machinery. It felt purposeful. They followed the line of vents along the beach, uncovering more as they went. Each one revealed a network beneath the sand, a hidden system stretching farther than John had ever imagined. Pipes thick as tree trunks, wires glowing faintly with pulsing light, and always that hum, steady and deep, like a heartbeat buried in the earth. "What if this isn't just for the city?" Teo whispered. "What if it's for us?" John stopped. He turned toward the boy, searching his face. The idea was absurd, but once spoken, it lingered. Were these machines sustaining Cremenos? Or were they controlling the people who lived inside it? Before he could answer, a new sound broke the silence, a groan, low and heavy, rising from the tunnels. It was deeper than the hum of machinery, deeper than the pumps that generated waves. It rattled the sand beneath their feet, sending ripples across the artificial tide. Teo froze, his eyes wide. That wasn't a machine. John's skin prickled. He had heard many sounds in his life, but never this. It was too raw, too primal. It was not the sound of something built. It was the sound of something alive. They stood on the empty beach, the glow of the dome casting pale light across the waves. Beneath their feet, the sand trembled. And in that moment, John knew one thing with certainty. Whatever secrets lay beneath the sand were never meant to be found. The sound haunted them long after they left the beach. It wasn't just noise. It was vibration. A pulse that sank into their bones and lingered in their chests, echoing even after the sand grew still again. For Teo it was terrifying, for John it was worse. It was familiar. He had heard it once before, years ago, while scrubbing the dome in the dead of night. Back then, he told himself it was just the groan of the ocean pressing against the glass, the natural strain of water pressing down from all sides. But this had been different, closer, stronger, deliberate. They returned to the same beach the following night. Curiosity pulled them back despite the fear. The waves lapped quietly against the shore, the air still and heavy. The vents below the sand hummed with their usual rhythm, but then, without warning, it came again. A deep, resonant tone rolled through the water, so strong the glass of the dome seemed to shudder. The sound was low enough to feel in the chest, a vibration that rattled teeth and tightened throats. It rose slowly, building in intensity, then fell away into silence as sudden as it had begun. Teo stumbled back, clutching his ears even through the regulator of his breathing mask. His eyes were wide, reflecting the glow of the artificial lights. "It's alive," he gasped. "It has to be alive." But John wasn't sure. The tone was too precise, too steady. It wasn't the random cry of a whale or the shifting pressure of the tides. It sounded engineered, like the deep drone of a machine built for a purpose no one was willing to explain. He looked out beyond the dome into the darkness. The ocean stretched endlessly, black and unknowable. Any number of creatures could be out there, pressing against the edges of the city. But what if the sound wasn't outside at all? What if it was coming from beneath them, within the city itself? The thought made his stomach twist. Teo turned to him, his face pale. What if the dome isn't keeping things out? What if it's keeping us in? The words struck John like a blow. He had heard rumors, whispers from workers and old residents who claimed Cremenos wasn't a sanctuary but a cage, a place designed not to protect but to contain. He had always dismissed those stories, but now, standing on the trembling beach, the boy's question felt impossible to ignore. The sound came again, louder this time. The sand vibrated, the air quivered, and even the artificial waves seemed to hesitate, as though the water itself was listening. John placed a steadying hand on Teo's shoulder. "We need to leave," but as they turned to go, a shadow moved across the glass of the dome. It was massive, shifting silently through the water just beyond their sight. For a brief moment, a single arm pressed against the surface, its outline faint but unmistakable. The memory of the giant octopus flashed through John's mind. But this was larger, much larger. The arm slid away into the darkness, vanishing as quickly as it had come. The deep tone faded with it, leaving only silence. They stood frozen, the hairs on their arms rising, hearts pounding against their ribs. And in that silence, John understood something he had never dared admit before. The ocean was not empty. The sound from the deep was not an accident. And whatever lived out there in the dark was far more powerful than the dome could ever hope to contain. The sound from the deep refused to leave their minds. Even as they walked back through the bright districts of Cremenos, surrounded by crowds and laughter, it lingered. Every vibration of the ground, every flicker of the artificial lights felt suspicious, as if the city itself was hiding something. Teo was the first to say it aloud. "We'll never know what it is if we just keep guessing. We have to see for ourselves." John shook his head. "There are places in this city we aren't supposed to go. Places that exist for a reason." The boy's eyes narrowed. And maybe that reason is the same one they don't want us to know. For a long moment, John said nothing. He had sworn decades ago to never step beyond the boundaries of his duty. But after 50 years of cleaning glass, he had earned a certain freedom. And deep down, he wanted answers too. That was how they found themselves walking through a section of the city marked restricted access. The streets here were deserted. No shops, no homes, no signs of life. Only fence is topped with humming wires and warning signs posted at every corner. Most people passed by without even noticing. But John knew the paths, the hidden ways maintenance workers sometimes took when they needed shortcuts. He led Teo through a narrow alley, its walls lined with heavy pipes. Steam hissed from the joints, filling the air with a metallic tang. The ground sloped downward, leading them deeper, until the bright glow of the upper city faded behind them. At the end of the alley was a heavy steel door, its surface scarred with scratches. The words "maintenance only" were stenciled in red across the front. John hesitated, his hand hovering over the handle. "Once we go in," he said quietly, "there's no turning back." Teo lifted his chin, then "Let's go." The door groaned as it swung open. Inside, the air was colder. The walls were bare concrete, the ceiling low and lined with cables that pulsed faintly with light. They followed the corridor, their footsteps echoing in the emptiness, until they reached a vast chamber. Rows of monitors stretched across one wall, flickering with data. Screens showed pressure readings, energy flows, and live footage of the dome's surface. But it wasn't the numbers that caught their attention. It was the maps. Projected across the largest screen was a full view of Cremenos. Not as a city of 32 districts, but as a grid of zones. Each slice of the bull's eye carefully labeled, with notes and calculations John had never seen before. Teo stepped closer. "They're monitoring everything." John's eyes darted across the data. He saw readings not just for the structure of the dome, but for movement inside the city. Heat signatures, patterns of behavior, even the flow of crowds in public spaces. "They are not just studying the dome," John whispered. "They are studying us." His words echoed in the empty chamber. Teo's breath caught. Then Cremenos isn't a city at all. It's an experiment. Before John could respond, a low vibration shook the floor. Not the deep, resonant tone from outside, but something sharper, mechanical, pulsing from the walls around them. The monitors flickered. For a moment, the image of the city grid dissolved into static. Then a new feed appeared. It wasn't data, it was video, footage of something moving in the ocean beyond the dome. A shadow vast enough to blot out entire districts, gliding silently through the dark. Teo staggered backward, his voice breaking. "It's real. Whatever's out there, it's real." John's throat went dry. For the first time, he wished they had never opened that door. The video feed lingered on the shadow drifting through the water. It was too large to measure, too indistinct to define. One moment it looked like a mass of tentacles. The next, a single vast shape gliding with impossible grace. Then it vanished into the black, leaving only empty water and the faint ripple of disturbed currents. Teo pressed closer to the screen, his voice shaking. "They knew. They've known all along." John's chest tightened. "That's why they built the dome this way. Not just to keep the ocean out. To keep that thing out." But the screens weren't the only secrets in the chamber. On the far wall, a row of cabinets stood locked. Their metal doors were marked with peeling labels. Their surface is coated in dust. Teo tugged at one handle, locked, another, locked. But when John crouched to the lowest drawer and pulled with all his strength, the rusted latch gave way with a sharp crack. Inside were files, thick folders bound with string, pages yellowed with age. John pulled one out and opened it under the dim glow of the monitor. His hands trembled as he flipped through diagrams of the city, but these were no ordinary blueprints. They showed Cremenos before it was built. Hand-drawn sketches of the bull's high design, each district marked with notations. Symbols John didn't recognize lined the margins, some resembling scientific equations, others more like ritual markings. Teo leaned over his shoulder. "What language is that?" John shook his head. "Not one I've ever seen." Deeper in the folder were reports, records of early construction, notes on pressure testing, and then something that made John's blood run cold. Subject: behavior remains consistent under prolonged exposure to artificial environments. Recommend expansion of additional districts to diversify population samples. John stared at the words, his pulse hammering in his ears. These weren't architectural notes. They were observations. Experiments. He pulled out another file, then another. Each one confirmed the same thing. Cremenos hadn't been built simply to preserve humanity beneath the waves. It had been built to study them, to measure how they lived, how they adapted, how they obeyed. Teo's face paled. "We're not residents, we're test subjects," the boy's voice cracked on. The last word, and the chamber suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in around them. But there was more. At the bottom of the drawer lay a sealed envelope, thicker than the rest. John tore it open with shaking fingers. Inside was a faded photograph, edges curled with time. It showed Cremenos from above, the bull's-eye design glowing faintly against the ocean floor. But unlike the city they knew now, the photo revealed only half of what existed. Beyond the dome, in the surrounding black, another structure loomed. Circular, massive, as if Cremenos was only one piece of a much larger design. Teo's eyes widened. "It's not just this city." John gripped the photo tightly, his knuckles white. "No, it's part of something bigger." Before they could process what that meant, the monitors flickered again. This time, words appeared in red across the screen. "Unauthorized access detected." A siren blared, sharp and metallic, reverberating through the chamber. The lights dimmed, flashing crimson with every pulse of the alarm. John stuffed the photo and files back into the drawer, but it was too late. The city knew they were here, and somewhere above them, someone or something had just been alerted to their presence. The siren's wail cut through the chamber like a blade. Red light pulsed across the concrete walls, each flash slicing the room into fragments of shadow and color. The words "on" the monitor repeated over and over, their message impossible to ignore. "Unauthorized access detected." Unauthorized access detected. Teo's breath came fast and shallow. He grabbed John's arm, his voice breaking. "We have to get out of here." John pulled him toward the door, but the corridor beyond was already alive with sound. Heavy footsteps echoed in the distance. Not the random shuffle of workers, but something measured, organized, closing in. They moved quickly, the sirens following them through the tunnels. Every turn seemed longer, every step heavier. The air grew hotter, filled with the metallic tang of burning wires, and then the ground shook. A deep, resonant tone vibrated through the floor, rattling pipes along the walls. It wasn't the alarm. It wasn't machinery. It was the sound they had heard on the beach, the sound from the deep, now pulsing through the city itself. Teo stumbled, clutching his ears. "It's here," he cried. "It's inside." John's mind raced. No, it couldn't be inside. The dome had always kept it out, but as the vibration intensified, rattling the very walls of the restricted zone, he realized the truth was far worse. The dome wasn't keeping it out. The dome was connected to it. They reached a stairwell, scrambling upward 2 steps at a time. The sirens faded as they climbed, replaced by the steady groan of metal under strain. The air ducts whistled with pressure, as though the entire city were struggling to hold itself together. When they burst out into the upper streets, the silence was deafening. The lights above flickered weakly, artificial stars dimming in the sky. Shops stood empty. Streets were abandoned. It was as if the entire city had sensed the alarm and chosen to disappear. Teo clutched John's sleeve. "Where is everyone?" John's mouth went dry. They were told to stay inside. As if in answer, the ground trembled again. This time, the dome itself groaned. A long, low moan of pressure rolled through the air, followed by the faintest sound of cracking. They looked up, high above, against the curve of the dome. A shadow moved, enormous, blotting out the artificial sky. A shape pressed against the glass, tentacles coiling and uncoiling in slow rhythm. One vast eye turned downward, staring directly at them. Teo froze. His lips trembled, but no words came out. John felt his knees weaken. For 50 years, he had trusted the dome, believed in its strength, defended its purpose. But standing there now, beneath the weight of that gaze, he knew everything he believed was a lie. The creature outside wasn't trying to break in. It was waiting, watching, and if the files were true, it had been watching since the very beginning. The sirens died suddenly, replaced by silence. The red lights faded, leaving only the dim glow of the streets. The shadow above slid away into the darkness, leaving no trace but the faint smear of slime against the glass. John and Teo stood alone in the empty street, hearts pounding, breaths shallow. The warning had been clear. They had seen too much, and from that moment on, the city of Cremenos would never let them go unnoticed again. Cremenos had always been presented as a miracle, a city beneath the waves, built for beauty, for safety, for humanity's future. But John and Teo had seen the cracks in the story. They had seen the forbidden districts, where construction never matched the official announcements. They had uncovered the hidden machinery humming beneath the sand, alive with a purpose no one explained. They had found the records that revealed the truth. Cremenos was not simply a home, it was a design, an experiment. And then there was the sound. The deep vibration that shook the dome was not random. It was not harmless. Whether it came from a creature, a machine, or something in between, one fact was undeniable. The city was not alone in the dark. John had spent 50 years believing his job was to protect Cremenos. But now, for the first time, he realized it might never have been about protection at all. It might have been about control. And as the sirens faded, as the shadow slid back into the ocean, one final question remained. Was Cremenos watching the ocean, or was the ocean watching Cremenos? Whatever the answer, the truth was no longer something they could ignore. The city had noticed them. The ocean had noticed them. And the story of Cremenos was only just beginning. You've just heard the story of Cremenos, a city built beneath the waves, where beauty hides secrets and paradise is never what it seems. But the deeper we look, the stranger it becomes. From the bulls, high design of the districts to the vibrations in the deep, from hidden records to shadows pressing against the dome, one truth is certain. Cremenos is not just a city, it is a mystery still unfolding, and the question now is yours. What do you believe? Was Cremenos built as a refuge for humanity, or as an experiment we were never meant to understand? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And while you're there, tell us where in the world you're listening from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. If this journey kept you hooked, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Owl Stories, and tap the bell so you never miss the next mystery. Because there are always more stories waiting in the dark. Until next time, stay curious.
Mm-hmm.